Just by a bit of review, we mentioned before that macroeconomics began to be a separate academic discipline around the time of the Great Depression. Prior to that time, there was what we called microeconomics. They didn't call it microeconomics at the time, they just called it economics. And the label of the category of economists that came prior to that, all the way back to Adam Smith, were called the classical economists. And the classical economists and microeconomics are pretty similar. And we thought we knew something about how the price mechanism works and how the invisible hand allocates things in the economy when people are free to move their private property and exchange it with whoever they want, whenever they want, whatever conditions that they want. That there was this thing we believed, by analogy, called the price mechanism of the invisible hand, that tended to move things where they were most needed in the economy. And it happened automatically. It didn't happen with a central planner. It happened as a result of hundreds and thousands of millions of individual plans by individuals, and those individual plans are changing all the time, and those ideas and values that were unique to each person are expressed in the marketplace, and people exchange something they don't value very highly, and they want to exchange it for something that they value more highly, and that happens at the grassroots level, and as that compounds and builds up, it's moving resources and goods and labor and people, it's moving things all around so that the maximum benefit of the economic resources are obtained through this mechanism of the invisible hand. And microeconomics and the classical economist believed that that worked. That there didn't need to be a central plan, there didn't need to be a big brother government involvement plan, that freedom actually worked. When we come to the Great Depression, the time of the Great Depression, of course it started with the stock market crash. The visibility of something going wrong began with the stock market crash. And then things began to rapidly unwind after that. And one of the very big things that marked the Great Depression, we'd had panics before. And when a bank would go down or there'd be a bank run, that's called a bank panic, and it would lead to all sorts of economic maldistribution and people losing their savings, and things were really messed up for a while, and they were called panics. And they would last anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days to a couple weeks, and they were over. But the Great Depression was a panic above all panics. It just went on and on and on and on. And it centers around this idea of unemployment. In any sport, in most sports, you have some sort of ball, a golf ball, a football, a volleyball, a basketball, a football. And the phrase is, keep your eye on the ball. That's where the action's going to be. So if the quarterback takes it, everybody on the other side's kind of watching who's got the ball and where's it going. And for baseball, don't look at your bat, don't look at a pitcher, keep your eye on the ball. Well, with the Great Depression, the ball is called unemployment. Keep your eye on unemployment, because that is the key. Everything kind of centers around the problem. How do we handle the unemployment problem? How do we handle a problem that we got a lot of people don't have any jobs? When people don't have any jobs, they don't make any money, they don't spend any money, then nobody produces anything, and the whole economy seemed to be coming apart at the seams, and what we thought we knew about economics was now called into question. Up until this point in time, we actually believed that we could take any commodity or service and we could plot it and say, well, there is a demand for haircuts and there is a supply of barbers that give haircuts. And so at a high price, people won't buy very many haircuts, but at a high price, boy, there's a lot of barbers out there. They'll stay up pretty late if that price is high enough. If the price is too low, or very low, I mean, people want to get a haircut every week, but if the price is very low, the barbers don't want to mess with it because it's not worth their time and effort. But someplace between those two extremes, a willing buyer and a willing seller will exchange something, whether it's a haircut, or carpet, or a car, or a kilowatt of electricity, or a gallon of gas. There will be an exchange. And the market mechanism will drive the price down toward the equilibrium, or if it's too low, it will drive it up to the equilibrium, so that if we're talking about vegetables at a farmer's market and we're talking about cabbages, if the price is very high, the suppliers want a high price out of their cabbages, but consumers don't want to pay that high price, so in order to eliminate the surplus, they got to lower their price to get some of these cabbages to move, and it moves it toward the equilibrium. The same thing happens if the price is too low. By too low, it means that what people want to buy a lot of those at that low price, but farmers aren't willing to sell them at that low price, and so the price comes up to the point where there is no surplus and there is no shortage. That's a key point in microeconomics, that there will be an equilibrium. The law of demand says the demand curve goes a negative slope. The law of supply says it's a positive slope. Therefore, in our model, those curves must cross. They must cross a two-dimensional axis, which means there always is a price at which the market will clear. And everybody who wants to sell their cabbages sells all the cabbages they want at that price, and everybody who wants to buy cabbages buy all the cabbages that they want at that price, and the market clears. Everybody walks away peacefully. Now, I didn't say they walked away happily. I said they walked away peacefully. That at that price, everybody got as much as they wanted that price, and everybody sold as much as they wanted that price. Of course, producers want a higher price, and of course, consumers want a lower price. But as a matter of fact, there is some price, which we call the price equilibrium, at which exchange will take place, and we show that exchange volume by the equilibrium quantity. We show that exchange price here on the price axis of the price equilibrium. Now enter the Great Depression. And all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, when we talk about employment, we're talking about the supply of workers and the demand for workers, and that model doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There is a permanent shortage of jobs. The other side of the coin would be there is a permanent surplus of workers. We can't find a job. But the point is, the market doesn't clear. Supposedly, there's supposed to be some equilibrium price that everybody who wants a job at that price gets a job at that price. But the market doesn't clear. Not just for a day or for a week or a month or a year. And the classical economists are saying, there is no good reason for why this thing doesn't work. Therefore, it must work, and therefore we just have to wait a little bit longer for the invisible hand just to sort everything out. So just have faith. What we know about economics is true, and therefore the market will clear labor just like it clears potatoes, just like it clears kilowatts of electricity and gallons of gasoline. You just have to wait for the invisible hand to work. And so they waited. And waited. And waited and waited. And people were still out of work. And not only that, more and more people were out of work. And next year there was even more people out of work. The height of the Great Depression, if you statistically walk down the street in most cities, you say, 1, 2, 3, that house. 1, 2, 3, that house. 1, 2, 3, that house. And that house meant there is a home in which there is no income. That household is not making any income. There's no money there. 25% of those able and willing to work didn't have any work. It just wasn't there. The invisible hand wasn't working. The market wasn't clearing. I don't know, supply and demand wasn't intersecting for some reason. And so we said, okay. This must not hold in all cases. We don't know why. We don't know how. But when all of a sudden everything that we believed to be true about our life or a system or an economy, when the facts of the matter is reality does not match our model, sooner or later people are going to have to say, I think the model might not be the whole picture, and they're up for grabs for some alternative explanation for what in the world is going on. Now, when we take a whole body of knowledge and we open up that window and we throw it all out and say, okay, let's start over from scratch. We called that, I think we had this conversation earlier. We called that a revolution. And we said before, if we go from a Democratic president to a Republican, or from a Republican to a Democrat, or even from a Democrat to a Libertarian, is that a revolution? And we said, well, no, that's not a revolution. It's a change, but it's not a revolution. A revolution is when we take everything we know or everything about our current political system and we throw it out the window and we start all over again with no constitution and just a military junta. Well, that's a revolution. That's a revolution. So in the beginning of macroeconomics, we said something's wrong, and we don't have a theory for it, and nothing in reality seemed to match the way we think reality should be. So macroeconomics began as an economic revolution. So in the beginning, we're talking about a revolution. I want to make reference to a book by Thomas Kuhn called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And let me just try to very, very, very briefly give a book review here of what's going on when there's scientific revolutions. When we talk about the idea of knowing something scientifically, we at least infer that it's more than my opinion, it's more than my viewpoint, it's more than just a couple different people's viewpoint, that it comes out of the scientific method, which we talked about earlier, a very disciplined, organized, methodical way of trying to arrive at knowledge. And it's supposed to stay put. It's supposed to be true not just for today, but it's supposed to stay put and be true in the future as well. And Thomas Kuhn, as he studied the history of scientific revolutions, said, well, as a matter of fact, that's strange, as a matter of history, scientific facts that we believe to be true don't always stay true. There are lots of things that we used to believe were true, like bloodletting or something like that, which we don't think are true anymore. There's lots of views of the world that now we don't think they're true anymore. And how do those sorts of revolutions where we take our whole body of, quote, knowledge of what we know and say, nope, that ain't working anymore, you throw it out the window and you start over and you build a whole brand new body of knowledge on a different set of presuppositions. How does that come about? And Thomas Kuhn was saying, well, normally what happens is you have this theory about how something works. And as time goes on, you get this anomaly. You have something in there that doesn't quite fit the theory. So you take it and you tweak it a little bit and you say, well, there's just a little bit of tweak here. We can kind of push it in so it fits in with our theory. Yeah, that's pretty good there. That fits with our theory. And so we keep our theory intact. And there comes another anomaly, another fact, another historical situation. And that doesn't quite square with our theory of how it works. And so we got to bend it a little bit. Don't want to bend, well, we'll just kind of put it over here and say, well, that's the exception to the rule. Everything has an exception to the rule. And then we keep on going, we find more exceptions to the rule, and more exceptions to the rule, and more exceptions to the rule. And then pretty soon somebody says, we got so many exceptions to the rule that the exceptions are more common than the rule. And they finally have to say, well, you know what? Maybe we don't have a good theory after all. Maybe we should throw that theory out and propose a different theory that explains all these exceptions. And once we have that, we go, oh, okay, that is a scientific revolution, where what we say is true matches both the empirical data that we encounter with our five senses, and we see happening around us. It matches that, and it matches our theory of the case. So when we have so many anomalies, something that just doesn't work, just doesn't fit the theory, and we have to throw the whole theory out and begin with a brand new different theory that seems to explain things better, Thomas Kuhn says that's how scientific revolutions come about. Not just scientific change, not just scientific growth, not just additions to knowledge, but we're talking about revolutions to knowledge. Now the reason I'm digressing on that is because macroeconomics was a scientific revolution. If I would back up here on science and knowledge, philosophers quite often talk about how do we know things, and there's two major views. One view is we know things by sticking with the facts. What we can see and hear and touch, just stick with that. If you just stick with the facts, and that tends to be called empiricism. And another view says, oh, no, it's not just the facts, it's our innate knowledge of logic and reason and rationality. So you've got the rationalist over here. And then you've got the empiricists who say the knowledge comes out of the data, and the rationalists who say, no, the data all by itself is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything until you got a theory to fit it into, so you can see cause and effect and all these sorts of things. One of my favorite instructors said that there's problems with rationalism. It can't stand on its own. There's problems with empiricism. It can't stand on its own. That the way we get knowledge is the same way two drunken sailors get back to the ship after they've been on leave and they're looped. They're both drunker than two skunks, and they're both leaning against each other to try to get back to the ship. But if either one of them had to stand on their own, they would fall down. So empiricism leans on rationalism, and rationalism leans on empiricism, and somehow both of them leaning on each other, we get something that works, something that makes sense, something that we call scientific knowledge. Now, again, my point here is that the data, the facts, all by themselves are meaningless. There's no such thing as meaningful data. It is our theory of the case that gives meaning and knowledge to the data that we get through our five senses. And of course the rationalists say, well, that's because real knowledge starts with innate, built-in concepts inside our brain, inside our mind, that allow us to construct rational concepts, and those rational concepts are the beginning of all knowledge. And the empiricist says, oh, no, it's the data that's the beginning of all knowledge, etc. So yeah, all facts are interpreted facts. So we're talking about the facts of the economy, and when they don't match our interpretation, we have to throw it out and get a new grid of interpreting what's going on. So in the beginning, macroeconomics began with an intellectual revolution, but the intellectual revolution came about because the person on the street said, neither the politicians nor the economists have a good explanation for what's going on. And I'm not buying this idea that I just have to have faith and believe that things are going to get better. Because they're not. And the economists, scientists, and the politicians, for all of their magic wands and potions and feel good and speak good and come up with whatever they're going to do, they didn't have an idea what was going on. When people don't know how the world works, and they cannot predict how the world works, they feel very, very, very insecure. And they will listen to theories of the case that in normal times they would think would be the most crackpot, idiotic idea you could possibly imagine, and they wouldn't give it a second thought. But when their system, their grid of knowledge, their presupposition of it, when they can't figure it out, well then I'm open. Hey, I don't know, so I'm open to any suggestion. If I would suggest to you that the reason these lights are on is not because of what we know about electricity. No. Well, everything we know about electricity, that's a bunch of old wives' tales. The reason that those lights are on is because there's such a thing as light genies. Yeah, there's light genies. And when I flip the switch one way, the light genies are happy, and they jump around, and they give off light when they're happy. And if I flip the switch the other way, they're all sad, and they don't do anything, and so they don't give off any light. I just thought I'd give you a wild, bizarre example of some theory I just made up. Because if nobody has a better idea, well then I guess the light genie theory works. Nobody has, flip it up, they're happy. Flip it down, they're not happy. Hey, what else do you need to know, right? I'm just simply saying that there is a fellow named John Maynard Keynes who walked in with a theory of what was going on in the economy when everybody else was going, I really don't know. So anybody who says they know, who's standing around with a bunch of people who say, I know one thing, I know I don't know, that person's going to win. That person was John Maynard Keynes. Macroeconomics really began with the book of John Maynard Keynes. And what we know as macroeconomics really began as what we call today Keynesianism. We'll begin with Keynesianism in our next session.